Hi, my name is Christine Dunford, so I will be reading you today a story called Mr. Seahorse by Eric Carle. And he has illustrated and written a lot of beautiful children's books. And my favorite things about him are his illustrations. So as we read this, we're going to do a little peekaboo game to see if you can tell who is hiding behind the seaweed. So if we have a seahorse, he lives in the ocean. So I bet this book is going to be about creatures that live in the ocean. So let's begin. Mr. Seahorse. Mr. and Mrs. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea. Mrs. Seahorse began to wiggle and twist this way and that. So Mr. Seahorse and Mrs. Seahorse. I wonder why she's wiggling and twisting all around. It's time for me to lay my eggs, she said. Can I help? Asked Mr. Seahorse. Oh, yes, thank you, said Mrs. Seahorse. And she laid her eggs into a pouch on Mr. Seahorse's belly. I'll take good care of our eggs, said Mr. Seahorse. I promise. So Mr. Seahorse is going to carry around the eggs and take good care of them until they hatch. And what do you think they're going to hatch into? As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by, and here we see our seaweed, a group of trumpet fish hidden in the patch of the reeds. Can you see the trumpet fish hiding here? There's some clues up there. They kind of look like they're playing trumpets. There they are. Bunch of trumpet fish hidden in the patch of reeds, and they look like trumpets. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. How are you, Mr. Stickleback? Asked Mr. Seahorse. Delighted, replied Mr. Stickleback. I just built a nest, and right away, Mrs. Stickleback laid her eggs into it. Now I'm taking good care of them until they hatch. Keep up the good work, said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. So this is Mr. Stickleback. And Mrs. Stickleback, a kind of fish, laid her eggs around him, and he's taking care of the eggs just like Mr. Seahorse is. Isn't that interesting that so far the daddy fish that we've seen in the story are taking care of the eggs? As Mr. Seahorse gently swam through the sea, he passed right by. Now here's some coral reef that's in the ocean. Beautiful different colors of coral reef, and there's something hiding behind there. Can you look for some clues? I see some eyes. I wonder who's hiding back there. A lionfish was hiding behind the coral reef. That's a kind of fish that you find in the ocean. Pretty interesting looking, isn't he? Yes, all of these are fish that you'd find in the ocean. Let's see what Mr. Seahorse does next. But before long, Mr. Seahorse had met another fish. How are you, Mr. Tilapia? Said Mr. Seahorse. Mr. Tilapia couldn't answer. His mouth was full of eggs. I know, said Mr. Seahorse. Mrs. Tilapia laid her eggs. Now you're taking good care of them until they hatch. Mr. Tilapia nodded his head. You must be very happy, said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. So Mr. Seahorse met a fish, which is a tilapia, and Mr. Tilapia, and he's taking care of the eggs by gently holding them in his mouth. So far we have seen daddy fish taking care of eggs, and they're all taking care of them differently. Mr. Seahorse has them in his pouch. Mr. Tilapia has them in his mouth. We met another fish, Mr. Stickleback, that has them around the outside of his back. So they're all carrying their eggs in different places. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by. Oh, I see some seaweed under the ocean. Look closely and see if you can see who's hiding behind the seaweed. Any clues? I see different colors, some blues in there. Is that an eye there? Well, let's see if you guessed right. A pair of leaf fish were hidden among the seaweed. These are called leaf fish. Pretty cool. It's hard to see them because they match the same color as the seaweed, don't they? Let's see what Mr. Seahorse does next. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Curtis?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Perfectly fine," said Mr. Curtis. "Mrs. Curtis laid her eggs, and I have stuck them on my head." That's pretty funny, isn't it? "Now I'm going to take good care of them until they hatch." "You're doing a good job," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. So this fish is taking good care of his eggs by putting them on what? His head. They've all are daddy fish, and they're all putting them on different places in their bodies. That's kind of funny, isn't it? As Mr. Seahorse gently swam through the sea, he passed right by, these look like some rocks under the ocean. And what do you think is hiding behind there? Any clues? Can you see any fins? Any eyes? Any colors? Any guesses? Who do you think it is? Wow, it was a stonefish was hidden behind a rock. He looks like he is camouflaged really well or blends in with the colors of the rock. Do you think that helps him from predators so other fish don't see him and want to eat him? Because he looks just like the rock. That's pretty smart, isn't it? But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Pipe?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Couldn't be better," replied Mr. Pipe. "Mrs. Pipe laid her eggs along his belly. Now I'm taking good care of them until they hatch." "You should feel proud of yourself," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. So he has met yet another fish called a pipefish who's taking care of his eggs by keeping them along his belly. These are all different types of fish in the ocean, and they're all taking care of their eggs in a different way. But they're all daddy fish too. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Bullhead?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Tip-top," replied Mr. Bullhead. "Mrs. Bullhead laid her eggs, and the eggs hatched. Now I'm babysitting." "You're doing a fine job," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on the way. So what's different about this fish? Does he have eggs on him? No, because what happened? They hatched. They all came out into little fish, swimming all around the daddy fish, and he's babysitting or taking good care of them. The time had come for the seahorse babies to be born. Mr. Seahorse wiggled and twisted this way and that. At last the babies tumbled out from Mr. Seahorse's pouch and swam away. One baby turned around and tried to come back into the pouch. "Oh no," said Mr. Seahorse, "I do love you, but now you're ready to be on your own." So did he take good care of all of his eggs? And did they all turn into baby seahorses? Yeah, so Mr. Seahorse did a very good job taking care of his babies, telling them that he loves them, and it's now time for them to grow up. And he met a lot of other interesting fish along the way too, who were doing a really good job taking care of their eggs and their babies. So the end. And that story again is called Mr. Seahorse by Eric Carle, and I hope you enjoyed it. They have beautiful pictures in there, and you get to learn a little bit about the animals in the ocean. Bye-bye.